Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be making a lovely spring daisy wreath. This is a nice neutral wreath. It's going to use a cream colored poly burlap mesh, as well as this very farmhouse, really cute sign that I found on Craft Outlet. So let's talk about materials. So for materials, like I mentioned before, this is going to be a poly burlap mesh wreath, and you're going to use two colors of poly burlap. Both of these I got at Craft Outlet. So this is a cream colored poly burlap mesh. It's the 10-inch wide version. And for this wreath, you're going to use almost the entire 10-yard roll. So there's 34 petals entirely. Hopefully I did the math right there. But one full roll of this, you're going to be cutting these into 10-inch squares. Then you're going to be using an olive green poly burlap mesh, also from Craft Outlet. This is going to be for the leaves. I usually use 5 to 6, also 10 to 11-inch long cuts for the leaves. Like I mentioned before, the sign I purchased also at Craft Outlet. This is an 8-inch in diameter metal sign that I've just wired so that I can attach it to the center of my wreath. We're going to put all of this on a 12-inch wreath frame that I've already attached a piece of number 5 plastic mesh to the center of. Most of our petals are going to actually reside on the mesh, plus one row on the metal portion too. And then all of my zip ties. So we're going to use a lot of zip ties today because of the number of petals, and I like the security of them. But of course, you can always use pipe cleaners if you wish. I just think that the zip ties give us a little bit more sturdiness in the wreath. All right, so I've already gone ahead and cut all of my poly burlap mesh into my 10-inch squares. I usually use a wood burner for all of my poly burlap mesh. I just think it makes slightly faster cuts, and it also seals all of the edges of the poly burlap. It just sort of melts the edges a little bit, and that's always nice for durability. Your petal is going to look like this at the end, and so I'll show you how I do this first. So let's move this out of the way. All right, so you're going to start with your 10-inch poly burlap square, and usually what I like to do is I take the lower left-hand corner of the finished edge here, and I meet it, or I meet the other corner up top and form a triangle. All right, and then with this triangle, some of the petals you'll gather along this folded edge, but for this daisy petal, you're going to start about halfway down the triangle and just gather it across like that. All right, and then I don't really know how to say this better, but you kind of swoop in one side, grab it in the middle, and then swoop in the other side. Pinch it and grab it in the middle. I'll bring that closer. And then we're going to secure this with a zip tie. All right, and then I like to just kind of shape it a little bit. You can flip this under if you want, make it sort of coved that way, but I personally like to have it kind of coved upward like that. And then you're going to trim this. And use your cutting tool to cut all this extra. All right, so there's number 1. So again, start with your 10-inch square, lower left-hand corner, bring it up to the upper right-hand corner. Make sure your triangle is nice and even. Gather in the middle from one side to the next. Then you're going to bring in one side, meet it in the middle, and I kind of tuck in the raw edges that are kind of on the back side there. All right, and shape it a little bit and attach that with a zip tie. And I always try to tuck some of these little raw edges in the back too, because I don't want those to come out fray. already done most of these, so I'm just going to do a couple more just so you get a visual idea of how I do this. It's always hard doing this on camera. Looking at my camera and looking at what I'm doing with my hands. All right, a couple more. All right, there's the last one. All right, so now I'm going to take a little bit of a break and then we'll come back and attach these to our wreath. All right, so welcome back. I now have my 34 petal leaves ready to go and applied to my wreath base. So again, this is a 12-inch wire wreath frame that I've purchased at Michael's. It has 6 of these crossbars going around the diameter, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4 wire bars going around in the circle. And we're actually going to apply our first row of petals to this outer edge out here as opposed to the second wire. The reason I do that for this wreath is just it gives us a little bit more dimension, and so it'll bring the diameter of this wreath closer to about 20 inches when you apply them on that outer wire frame. And I find that, you know, with a little bit of extra zip tie on there, and you'll see what I mean, they tend to stay nice and sturdy. They don't tend to flop over. Sometimes if you put petals on this outer frame, they don't lay flat, but that doesn't seem to be an issue with this wreath, okay? So we're gonna start, and in this first outer row, I place 14 petals. And so it's roughly 2 per section. There's 6 sections here. But on a couple of these sections, I actually squeeze in an extra petal. So 14 in total in this outer row. So I'm just going to go ahead, place my zip tie in that outer edge. And instead of just using 1 zip tie, I actually apply 2. And the reason for that is if you just apply the 1, you'll see, number 1, it tends to be a little floppy, but it also tends to sit sort of diagonal. And I want it to be nice and straight like that, perpendicular to the frame. So I'm going to place another zip tie going in the opposite direction from the first one. That way it'll keep it nice and straight and stiff. So let's get our second zip tie. And I'm just going to go the opposite way. Again, a lot of zip ties were sacrificed for this wreath, but it'll be worth it. So now that I've added the second one, you'll see number 1, it's not moving anywhere. And it's nice and perpendicular to the frame. All right. And so we'll do another one. So here we'll put in 1 zip tie going this way. And another zip tie going that way. So 3 zip ties per petal. And then I like to place these close enough to one another so that they overlap just a little bit. And so you'll see, well, we can overlap it this way. And so I'm going to place number 3 in this section. Most sections will have 2 petals. This one I'll do 3. So there's 1 zip tie. And number 2 zip tie. All right, overlap that a little bit. And so the spacing in between each petal is maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches. I might have to adjust that once we move along. We'll have to see. All right. So zip tie this direction. And zip tie the other direction. All right, let me just do one more. So zip tie in one direction. Zip ties are not cooperating with me today. All right. And then we'll do one more the opposite direction. And just overlap that a little bit. Give you a closer shot there. All right, so now I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to finish this row and come back and we'll start row number 2. All right, so row 1 is done, and I actually added a 15th petal. It just didn't look full enough. The petals weren't close enough with 14. So 3 of these sections will have, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2 petals. So 15. All right, so for row 2, things get a little bit easier because we're only going to be using 1 zip tie per petal. The next row is 12 petals. And where I place them, I like to place them just inside where the mesh starts. So we're going to be going right around here, just inside where you've zip tied your mesh to the frame. All right, so I'm going to stand up so I can get a bit of angle here. And I don't worry too much about the placement of this initial petal, but what I usually will do is I'll place one, then I place another one exactly opposite, then I place one here and one here. So I sort of do 4 quadrants for this next row. So I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I fill in the space with 2. All right, so 2, 4, 6, 8, and that'll total 12. And then I make sure at the end to overlap them. All right, so we'll put number 2 here. Doesn't have to be perfectly even like that, but I just like the symmetry, so. All right, here goes number 3. And again, just 1 zip tie to attach these because they're on the plastic mesh. They're really not going to move very much, and they're nice and straight and flat and in line with the other ones. All right. And here's number 4. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 quadrants here. And now we're going to fill in these sections with 2 petals evenly spaced. And usually it's about, just sort of eyeball this, about 1.5 inches in between each one. And then again, I like each petal to sort of overlap the petal next to it. Let's see, put this one right about there. Tuck this side under so that they're all kind of overlapping the next one. I always work counterclockwise too for my wreaths, so move this direction. Another 2 here. Let's see. Put this one a little bit closer to the center. There. Tuck that under. All right, so I will finish row 2 and then come back and we'll do the center row. All right, so last row, final row of 8 petals. And this one's a little tricky in terms of placement because you want to keep in mind where your sign is going to go. And so if I just plunk this down in the middle there, you'll see that the second row actually fills quite a bit of space. but the third row is going to kind of fill in any of these gaps. And the whole petal is not going to be visible once the sign is in place. It's just going to be a little, almost like a little coved portion that peeks out. So I've already put one zip tie in here so I can show you placement. It doesn't have to be exact, but this third row is going to work in from this second row about 2.5 inches, okay, when you measure that out. And so again, we're going to use 8 petals, and the placement is going to be similar to the second row, where I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, so 4 quadrants, and then I'm going to fill in the space in between those 4 petals with the remaining 4 petals. All right, so we'll place, and then you'll see once the sign, we'll put the sign back on, obviously. We'll show you how just a little sort of a crescent shape of this final row will show. All right, so I always just sort of eyeball this, get the right placement here. Just make sure I like that. Is that about 2.5? Yeah, give or take. I think that's good. I almost never measure these sorts of things. I just usually go based on feel. But obviously for tutorials like this, you want to be a little bit more exact in what you're telling folks to do. All right, so here's number 3. And number 4. I'm going to place that one right about there. And when I make my wreaths, it's not uncommon for me to completely remove an entire row of petals because I don't like the placement. So bear with me. So I'm gonna actually cut these zip ties. Oops, that one doesn't want to go. So I can see with my sign in place whether this is going to work. So let me just place this right here. Okay, I like that. So as you can see with this just placed on there lightly, just a little bit of an edge of each of those petals is going to show. So that should be good. So let me just take this off without ruining my petal. That wouldn't be good. All right. So the remaining 4 will go in these spaces. You'll leave one side over and tuck the other side under, just like in the previous rows. All right, almost there. And finally, last but not least, all right, tuck that guy under. Give all my remaining zip ties a good tug, snip all these off. All right, so here we have, 35 petals, 15, 12, 8. And now you can go ahead and usually I like to apply the sign last. Usually I like to do petals next. So we'll take a break and do the petals. All right, for the leaves, I went ahead and I placed some zip ties so you could see where each of these leaves are going to go. So on this 12-inch wire frame, it has 6 of these crossbars going around. And so that's going to serve as a map of, the approximate location of all my leaves. So we're going to have 6 leaves going around the perimeter of this. And I've already gone ahead and woven my zip tie into the frame. And so I just wove it under the first two wire ridges here, then I went over the third one, and then under the fourth one. And you'll notice that that's pretty solid. It's not really moving around much. And so my hope is that once the leaf is attached here, it also will be pretty solid. And we should be able to kind of tuck it underneath the frame a little bit for a little bit of added support. So for the leaf, you're going to take your 10 by 10 inch square of olive green poly burlap mesh. I usually like to place it in front of me like in a diamond formation. So the point, one point near my stomach, one point away from me, and you're going to take the two corners and meet in the middle like that. And then you're going to gather from one side to the next like that. Almost looks like a little bow tie. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of a bend, and I will attach it here near crossbar number 1. I'm going to kind of tuck it under a little bit and give it a little bit more of a crimp there, like that. Okay. And then we'll just move around the circle here. All right, so petal number 2 or leaf number 2, take the two corners, meet in the middle, gather from one side to the next, like that. Give it a little bit of a bend. Attach my zip tie. I kind of stick it underneath this little bar. Stick part of the green under there and give it a little bit of a bend and attach that. All right, let's do number 3. All right, number 4. This is always the hardest part to me, is to get the leaf placement proper and solid. Number 5. Some of my flowers I don't place any leaves on, but this one just seems to really demand it. And I like the olive green color with the cream. Just has a nice sort of farmhouse feel to it. So this one, I'm going to move my petal out of the way so I can stick this leaf underneath a little bit more. It's more likely to lie flat if it's not sticking out underneath the frame. All right, this will be number 6. All right. Stick that guy underneath a little bit more. Tuck that under. All right. Make sure those are all pretty solid. And there you go. I'm gonna cut a little straggler from my mesh. A couple little frayed pieces here too. Don't like those. And cut my zip ties. Get rid of those. And then we'll flip this over so that you can see where we're at this point. All right. All right. Lovely. think I'm pretty happy with that. I like to spread out my leaves a little bit. They don't have to be perfect. And then the finish is pretty easy, but really satisfying. All the hard work is done. Like I said, I got this on Craft Outlet. It's an 8-inch in diameter. It's metal, so I think it'll be pretty durable outside. Little metal sign, and has 2 little holes on either end that I just strung some wire through and twisted it. And then we're just going to hopefully not struggle with it too much. I'm just going to wire it in the middle here. Sometimes the easiest steps tend to be, at least for me, the most technically challenging. So let's see, flip that guy over. And we'll twist this on the back. Hopefully this will be straight. If not, I will reapproach. Let's see. All right, that looks pretty good. So there, so I'll probably tighten that a little bit more, but that's our finished product. And then, you know, I usually like to cut a nice felt circle, and I use a pipe cleaner to attach it. So you can usually use some more zip ties and attach this to the back so it protects your door, doesn't scratch anything, so that this piece of wire doesn't get in the way. But there you have a lovely spring wreath. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to my channel. I hope to get more ideas up and running in the coming weeks with some new, hopefully lovely wreaths for your home. Have a good day.